A 911 call comes in. The operator's voice remains steady, trained to handle emergencies, while the caller's is frantic, almost breathless. A man's words tumble over each other as he tries to explain. His wife has collapsed. She isn't moving. She isn't breathing. He begs for help, his voice shaking as he follows the dispatcher's instructions. The sound of rustling fabric and hurried footsteps fills the background. He's checking for a pulse. He's pressing against her chest, but there's no reaction. The sirens arrive fast, the flashing red and blue lights casting sharp reflections on the windows of the quiet streets of Franklin, Tennessee. EMTs rush inside, their equipment in hand, assessing the scene in seconds. Emily Parker lies motionless on the kitchen floor, her face drained of color, her body still. They begin CPR, pushing against her chest with forceful precision. Oxygen mask. Defibrillator. Every possible measure to bring her back. Nothing works. Her husband watches, his hands gripping his hair, his breaths coming in sharp gasps. He doesn't understand. Just an hour ago, she was fine. They had been talking about the nursery, the baby's name, what life would look like in just a few months. There was no warning, no sign that anything was wrong. Now she's being carried out on a stretcher, her body covered in wires, while paramedics move with a practiced urgency. Neighbors have gathered outside, whispering among themselves. They know Emily. She was always outside tending to her garden, greeting them with a smile. She and her husband had been together for years. She was young. Healthy. Expecting. At the hospital, doctors take over, but the outcome has already been decided. They try every possible measure, but nothing changes. After several attempts, they stop. A nurse places a hand on Michael's shoulder. She doesn't have to say the words. The weight of the silence is enough. Emily Parker is gone. Her husband collapses into a chair, his head in his hands. The reality of it settles over him, heavy and suffocating. She was fine that morning. Laughing, drinking tea at the kitchen table. Now she's gone. The baby they had been waiting for, gone too. Doctors review her file, searching for anything that could explain what happened. There is no history of heart problems. No undiagnosed condition. No medical explanation for why a woman in her 20s, with no prior issues, would collapse without warning. Then a nurse notices something unusual. Emily's medical records show multiple visits to the hospital, always during her pregnancies. Each time, she complained of nausea, dizziness, and weakness. She had been tested for complications, but nothing conclusive had ever been found. The symptoms would fade, and life would go on. Until now. It's a pattern. One that doesn't feel like coincidence. The doctor reviewing her records pauses, considering the implications. They request an autopsy. It's routine, but this time, they're looking for something specific. When the results come back, it's clear. Emily Parker didn't just collapse. She didn't just die. The cause of death isn't natural. It wasn't a hidden condition, an unexpected failure of the body. Someone had been poisoning her. And whoever did it had been doing it for years. Franklin, Tennessee, was the kind of town where people knew their neighbors, where families gathered for backyard cookouts, and where life moved at a steady, predictable pace. Nestled in the suburbs, the Parker family embodied everything that seemed warm and wholesome about small-town life. To the outside world, they were the picture of happiness. Michael and Emily, married for nearly a decade, raising two beautiful children with a third on the way. Emily Parker, 32, was a devoted wife, a loving mother, and a well-respected elementary school teacher. Her students adored her. Parents trusted her. Colleagues admired her patience and warmth. She had that rare ability to make everyone around her feel valued, as if they were the most important person in the room. To those who knew her, Emily was everything a person should aspire to be: compassionate, driven, and full of life. But underneath the surface of that seemingly perfect life, something insidious had been lurking for years. Jessica Parker, Emily's younger sister, had always been a presence in her life. At 29, she worked as a nurse's aide at a local clinic, a job she had taken after struggling to find her footing in other careers. She had never quite lived up to the expectations set by her older sister. Where Emily was outgoing and naturally gifted, Jessica had always felt like she was trying to catch up. People admired Emily effortlessly, Jessica had to fight for attention. Growing up, the comparisons were endless. Emily excelled in school, making honor roll, while Jessica barely scraped by. Emily married young to a man who adored her, had a house filled with love and laughter, while Jessica's relationships always seemed to fall apart before they could turn into something lasting. It wasn't fair. At least, that's how Jessica saw it. But jealousy alone wasn't enough to justify what was happening in the Parker household. The truth was far more terrifying. For years, Jessica had been a constant figure in Emily's home, a helpful presence during her pregnancies, always eager to lend a hand. She was the fun, helping with chores, and, most notably, making Emily her morning tea. It had become a ritual. Jessica would bring over breakfast and a steaming cup of tea, something she insisted would ease Emily's nausea and help with the pregnancy fatigue. No one questioned it. Why would they? It was a small, thoughtful act of kindness. But that simple cup of tea was something else entirely. As Emily's pregnancies progressed, so did her mysterious illnesses. The symptoms were always the same: extreme fatigue, dizziness, stomach pains. Doctors brushed it off as pregnancy complications, something common and nothing to be overly concerned about. Blood work showed nothing alarming. Tests came back inconclusive. Emily, ever trusting, never suspected a thing. She had her sister by her side, someone she could rely on, someone who loved her. But love was never what motivated Jessica. There was resentment. There was bitterness. And there was something much worse, a desire for control, for power over the sister. Emily's death wasn't a sudden tragedy. It wasn't an act of fate or an unexplained medical mystery. It had been in the making for years. A slow, calculated poisoning, hidden behind a sister's gentle smile and a cup of tea that never seemed out of place. And now, for the first time, the cracks in the story were starting to show. The first signs of trouble appeared during Emily's first pregnancy. She was 27 at the time, newly expecting her first child, glowing with excitement. Everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. At first, it felt like normal morning sickness, the kind every mother-to-be expected. But soon, Emily's symptoms took on a life of their own. The nausea was relentless, hitting her like waves that never receded. Dizziness made even the simplest tasks feel overwhelming. Fatigue weighed her down like an invisible force, draining her until getting out of bed felt impossible. Doctors ran tests, checking for preeclampsia, anemia, gestational diabetes, anything that could explain her condition. Nothing came back abnormal. They assured her it was likely severe pregnancy sickness, something that would pass with time. She trusted them. After all, they were the experts. But Emily wasn't just exhausted. She was deteriorating. Michael was worried. But it was Jessica who stepped in the most. She was always there, always ready to help. She'd stop by every morning with breakfast and a hot cup of tea, insisting it would help ease the nausea. And somehow, it did, at first. On the days she drank it, Emily would feel a brief moment of relief before the symptoms surged back, stronger than before. It was odd, but she never questioned it. Why would she? Jessica was just being a good sister, helping the best way she knew how. The sickness plagued Emily for most of the pregnancy. The dizziness became unbearable, striking at random, leaving her clutching the nearest wall for balance. The nausea was more aggressive, no longer just an inconvenience but something that kept her bedridden for days at a time. Even Michael, who had seen her suffer through the first pregnancy, knew something was different. Emily agreed. But the doctors still found nothing. Then came the weight loss. Pregnancy was supposed to bring a glow, a fullness of life. But Emily looked hollow. Her cheeks sank in, dark circles formed under her eyes. She was barely keeping food down. Jessica was there, always. Bringing food, bringing tea, doting on her the way only a caring sister would. Then, at just under 5 months, Emily woke up in the middle of the night with sharp, unbearable pains. She knew instantly. By the time they reached the hospital, it was already over. The baby was gone. The doctors had no explanation. Emily had no pre-existing conditions, no known risk factors. It was as if her body had just given up. She was devastated. But through it all, Jessica was by her side, wiping away her tears, promising her that everything would be okay. Emily never knew that the person comforting her was the very one responsible. After grieving the loss, Emily and Michael were ready to try again. For the first few months, everything seemed okay. No unusual sickness, no unbearable fatigue. It was almost as if whatever had plagued her before had disappeared. But then, around the 4th month, it all came crashing down. The sickness returned, more vicious than ever. Emily was weak, pale, barely able to stand some days. She became confused, struggling to remember simple things, Michael's work schedule, where she had left her keys, what she had eaten for breakfast. Jessica, as always, was there to help. Bringing food. Bringing tea. Sitting by her bedside with a soft smile and a reassuring touch. Then, one evening, everything spiraled. Michael came home from work to find Emily on the couch, looking dazed, unfocused. Her breathing was shallow, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't respond when he spoke to her. Then, suddenly, her body stiffened, and she collapsed. Panic exploded through him. He caught her before she hit the floor, shaking her shoulders, calling her name. She was unresponsive. The frantic 911 call. The sirens. The EMTs flooding into the house, the machines, the wires, the desperate attempts to save her. Then, finally, the silence. Emily was gone. No one understood how. No one knew why. But in the days that followed, as doctors reviewed her case and an autopsy was ordered, one thing became terrifyingly clear: this was no random tragedy. This was murder. And the killer had been right there all along. Emily's death had seemed like a cruel twist of fate that left her husband widowed. When the toxicology report returned, however, the grief that once enveloped the family shifted into a deep, unsettling suspicion. Ethylene glycol, the deadly component of antifreeze, had been found in Emily's system, a poison that is colorless, odorless, and capable of slipping through the body undetected until it is too late. This substance, known to shut down the kidneys and then the brain, left its victims confused, weak, and ultimately lifeless. The levels detected in her blood indicated long-term exposure, administered repeatedly over the years rather than in a single dose. The revelation shattered any semblance of a natural death and confirmed that Emily had been murdered. In the quiet of the following morning, detectives arrived at the Parker home with a silent urgency. Michael, still reeling from the shock, allowed them entry into the space that had once been filled with warmth and laughter. As they explained their findings, the reality sank in: Emily had not merely succumbed to illness, but had been deliberately killed. With no signs of forced entry or evidence of a break-in, and with nothing missing from the home, the questions multiplied. Emily was known to be a mother and loving wife with no known enemies. Her death was as inexplicable as it was devastating. The investigation naturally turned to those closest to her. Michael, the grieving husband, was among the first to be questioned in what was a routine procedure in cases like these. His recollections painted a picture of a stable marriage, one devoid of conflict or infidelity, yet his memories were haunted by a recurring theme: Emily had fallen ill during every pregnancy. In each instance, she had exhibited severe symptoms that ranged from overwhelming fatigue to bouts of confusion, symptoms that were brushed aside as typical pregnancy complications. However, this time, the confusion and forgetfulness seemed far more pronounced, prompting Michael to reconsider the narrative he had always trusted. A critical detail emerged from Michael's recollections: the tea that Jessica, Emily's younger sister, had brought to her every morning. The same tea had been a constant in their lives, offered as a remedy for the persistent nausea and fatigue that plagued Emily during her pregnancies. Michael's thoughts gradually shifted to the possibility that this everyday act, once seen as a simple gesture of care, might have been part of a darker pattern. Every instance of illness coincided with the consumption of that tea, and every improvement occurred only when the tea was no longer a part of her routine. With this connection firmly in mind, the investigators turned their attention to Jessica, the devoted sister and constant caretaker. Jessica had been an ever-present figure in Emily's life, seamlessly integrated into the family dynamic and always there during times of need. Yet, as the detectives began to piece together the evidence, subtle inconsistencies emerged in her account. A careful examination of the family's daily routine and the pattern of Emily's illnesses revealed a troubling correlation. The investigators noted that the timing of the illnesses consistently coincided with the consumption of the tea that Jessica prepared, and the recurrence of the symptoms during each pregnancy could no longer be dismissed as mere coincidence. The investigation proceeded to a meticulous search of Jessica's living space. The detectives conducted a detailed examination of her kitchen, where amidst neatly arranged tea boxes and common household items, they discovered a small, unlabeled bottle hidden in a cabinet above the sink. The bottle contained a faint, powdery residue that, upon further forensic analysis, was confirmed to be ethylene glycol, the same toxin that had been found in Emily's system. This discovery, inconspicuous yet damning, pointed unequivocally to long-term poisoning. Each step of the investigation, from the autopsy results to the detailed interviews and the thorough search of Jessica's belongings, slowly unraveled the carefully constructed facade of a loving, caring sister. In the quiet moments after the discovery, the detectives observed that while Michael's shock and sorrow were raw and immediate, Jessica maintained a composed exterior that belied the mounting evidence against her. The cumulative weight of the evidence, the consistent pattern of Emily's illnesses, the presence of the toxin in her system, and now the incriminating residue in Jessica's kitchen, transformed the case from a tragic accident into a calculated act of murder. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, confirmed the unthinkable truth: the very person who had cared for Emily throughout her pregnancies, the one who had been a constant presence in her life, had been systematically administering poison over the course of several years. The detectives left Jessica's home with the incriminating bottle in hand, its unassuming presence belying the magnitude of the crime it represented. In that moment, the full extent of the betrayal became clear: Emily had been slowly and deliberately poisoned by the one person she trusted most, and the investigation had uncovered a horrifying pattern of calculated malice that would soon turn Jessica Parker from a familiar, trusted figure into the prime suspect in a murder that had taken a life, shattered a family, and forever altered a quiet suburban community in Franklin, Tennessee. Digital forensic evidence soon emerged as a critical piece of the puzzle. Investigators meticulously combed through Jessica's laptop and mobile phone, uncovering a digital trail that proved more damning than anyone could have imagined. In the depths of her browsing history were searches that revealed a disturbing preoccupation with poisoning. Among the most alarming were inquiries into the toxic properties of antifreeze, including how much antifreeze could cause a miscarriage and methods to administer poison gradually over time. These searches, hidden among mundane browsing data, indicated a calculated interest in a poison that is both colorless and odorless, capable of killing slowly and leaving minimal trace. At the same time, forensic analysts scrutinized Jessica's financial records and store receipts. A pattern emerged: over the years, during the periods when Emily was pregnant, Jessica had purchased antifreeze on multiple occasions. Each purchase was made in cash, a deliberate choice that left little to be traced in the digital records and reinforced the notion of premeditation. The receipts, sparse and unremarkable on their own, collectively formed a timeline that corresponded with the onset of Emily's repeated illnesses. Every instance of unexplained nausea and dizziness during pregnancy coincided with a period in which Jessica had discreetly acquired antifreeze, a substance that, in small doses, could be administered without immediate detection. In addition to the digital and financial evidence, witness testimonies contributed to the mounting case against Jessica. Michael, still struggling to come to terms with the loss of his wife, recalled with painful clarity that Jessica was invariably present during every episode of illness. Her routine of preparing tea for Emily was a constant, a comforting ritual that had unwittingly become the method of her demise. The recollections of those who had observed the family's daily life in Franklin, Tennessee, added another layer of certainty. A co-worker from the local clinic, where Jessica had worked as a nurse's aide, had noted that Jessica had once expressed envy over Emily's seemingly flawless life, a sentiment that, while easily dismissed in passing, now appeared as a motive for the gradual sabotage that had unfolded over years. Each element of the investigation, digital records revealing disturbing searches, a series of cash purchases of antifreeze precisely timed with the cycles of Emily's pregnancies, and eyewitness accounts that placed Jessica at the center of every critical moment, began to paint a picture of deliberate, methodical poisoning. The evidence was not isolated or circumstantial, it formed a coherent narrative of betrayal. Emily's repeated bouts of severe illness, dismissed at the time as mere complications of pregnancy, now took on a sinister clarity when viewed through the lens of Jessica's calculated actions. Every detail converged to reveal that the very person who had cared for Emily, who had been a constant presence at every step of her pregnancies, was in fact orchestrating her slow and deliberate death. The investigators, piecing together the timeline of events, realized that the pattern was inescapable. Emily had fallen ill repeatedly during her pregnancies, only to recover when the exposure to the toxic substance ceased. The repeated occurrence was too systematic to be a tragic coincidence. It was evident that someone had taken advantage of Emily's trust and her vulnerable state. The digital searches, the cash receipts, and the testimonies all confirmed that Jessica had not only been present during these critical moments but had actively provided the medium, her homemade tea, that had delivered the poison over time. With each new piece of evidence, the scale of the betrayal grew. What had once seemed like a series of unfortunate medical events was now unfolding as a meticulously executed murder. The investigation had transformed from an inquiry into unexplained illness into a quest to understand how a sister's care had become the instrument of murder. Jessica was soon taken in for questioning, her presence in the interrogation room as measured and controlled as ever. Initially, she maintained a facade of innocence that seemed almost rehearsed, a portrayal of a sister who had always cared deeply for Emily, who had cherished every moment spent at her side, and who could not possibly be responsible for the inexplicable deterioration of her beloved sister's health. In the quiet, sterile light of the interrogation room, as the investigators methodically outlined each piece of evidence, Jessica's carefully maintained composure began to crumble. Her initial denials, once steady and insistent, gave way to inconsistencies in her account, and the weight of the incontrovertible facts pressed down on her. With every piece of evidence, every digital record, every cash receipt, every documented instance of illness, her story unraveled further. The unmistakable alignment of the purchases with the timeline of Emily's recurring illnesses, combined with the clear toxicological evidence, left little room for any alternative explanation. Under the intense pressure of the interrogation, and confronted with the undeniable evidence of her involvement, Jessica's resistance finally broke. The person who had once presented herself as a devoted sister and caretaker, whose every action had been interpreted as genuine concern for Emily's well-being, was forced to confront the reality of her actions. In a moment of profound collapse, she began to admit the unthinkable truth. The carefully concealed truth, that she had, over years, methodically administered poison under the guise of caring for her sister, emerged from beneath layers of denial. The confession was not a moment of remorse or regret, but rather a resigned acknowledgement of a plan set in motion long ago, a plan that had spiraled into irrevocable tragedy. In that stark, clinical setting, the full horror of what had transpired became clear, Emily Parker had been slowly and deliberately poisoned by the one person she had trusted above all others. The arrest and subsequent confession marked the turning point in the investigation, sealing a case that had begun with inexplicable symptoms and ended with a betrayal that would forever scar the memory of a quiet suburban community in Franklin, Tennessee. Inside a cold, sterile courtroom, the truth unraveled like a slow-burning nightmare. For months, the Parker family had grieved Emily's sudden passing, believing it to be a cruel twist of fate, a pregnancy complication that stole a young mother too soon. But now, the reality was laid bare in front of a jury, each detail darker than the last. Jessica Parker wasn't just a grieving sister. She was a murderer. And her crime wasn't one of passion or impulse. It was slow. Calculated. Drawn out over years. She had sat across from Emily at the breakfast table, watched her sip from the very cup that would bring her death, and smiled through every conversation as her sister unknowingly inched closer to the grave. Now, as Jessica sat before a judge, shackled and silent, the question remained, why? The prosecution wasted no time dissecting the twisted psychology behind Jessica's actions. She had watched Emily live the life she secretly longed for. Emily had a devoted husband who adored her, a beautiful home, a successful career, and the promise of motherhood, a happiness that Jessica believed should have been hers. For years, Jessica had masked her bitterness behind a facade of warmth, playing the role of the supportive sister while resentment festered beneath the surface. Every pregnancy announcement, every glowing moment of anticipation, was like a knife twisting deeper into her gut. But she didn't want Emily dead, not right away. She wanted to watch her suffer. The slow-acting poison, discreetly added to Emily's tea during every pregnancy, was never meant to kill instantly. It was designed to weaken her body, drain her energy, and ensure that motherhood would be a struggle rather than a joy. Jessica wanted Emily to experience pain. To feel fragile. To see her perfect life crumble beneath the weight of unexplained illness. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. But Jessica's control over Emily's suffering slipped when, after her third pregnancy, Emily never recovered. The poison had done irreversible damage. And instead of watching her sister struggle indefinitely, Jessica became a killer. The trial gripped the nation. A sister poisoning another sister. A crime spanning years. It was the kind of case that sent chills down people's spines, because if a woman could do this to her own flesh and blood, what was anyone truly capable of? Jessica's defense team tried to paint her as a woman suffering from mental illness, a broken psyche pushed too far by lifelong feelings of inadequacy. They claimed she didn't intend to kill Emily, only to make her sick. But the prosecution tore through that argument like tissue paper. They laid out the evidence with brutal precision, bottle after bottle of herbal tea laced with traces of toxic compounds, diary entries revealing Jessica's obsession with Emily's life, and the chilling realization that this wasn't a single moment of madness, but a long, deliberate act. This was not a mistake. This was a choice, made over and over again. Witnesses took the stand. Emily's husband, his voice raw with grief, recounted the months leading up to his wife's death, how her body grew weaker, her health mysteriously declined, and no doctor could explain why. A forensic toxicologist broke down exactly how Jessica's method worked, showing how the poison mimicked symptoms of pregnancy-related complications, ensuring no one suspected foul play. Then came the most damning piece of evidence, security footage from a baby shower, showing Jessica preparing Emily's tea, stirring it with an eerie calm. The jury barely had to deliberate. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom as the final verdict was delivered. Guilty. But not first-degree murder. Instead, the jury found Jessica Parker guilty of second-degree murder, a charge that acknowledged the deliberate harm she inflicted but left questions about her true intent. The sentence, 35 years to life. A punishment severe enough to reflect the gravity of her crime, yet not so absolute that it erased the possibility of eventual release. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Some believed justice had been served. Others whispered that it wasn't enough. Jessica, however, remained still. No tears. No outburst. And then, as she was led away, she turned slightly, and for just a second, a small, almost imperceptible smile curled at the corner of her lips. Not a smile of regret. Not a smile of sorrow. But the kind of smile that left an unsettling question hanging in the air: had she truly lost? And if given the chance, would she do it again? The courtroom emptied, but the echoes of the trial lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. A sister's betrayal. A crime that had unfolded slowly, insidiously, over years. The kind of horror that didn't strike in an instant but poisoned the soul, one drop at a time. Jessica Parker had been sentenced, yet the story didn't end there. For Emily's husband, Michael, the true punishment wasn't Jessica's years behind bars. It was the life sentence of grief he now carried. He stood before the cameras outside the courthouse, the weight of his loss pressing on every word he spoke. Emily never suspected a thing, he said, his voice raw. She trusted her sister with her life. And that's what makes this so horrifying. The reporters fell silent. There were no follow-up questions that could possibly capture the magnitude of his pain. The world had fixated on the details of the case, the poison, the tea, the years of suffering, but for those who loved Emily, it wasn't about the crime anymore. It was about the void she left behind. A loving wife. A woman who had spent her last years fighting an invisible enemy, never realizing that the enemy had been sitting right beside her all along. Jessica had been sentenced. But was justice truly served? Some believed her punishment wasn't enough. That second-degree murder left room for doubt, that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't meant for her sister to die. Others argued that it was too harsh, that her crime had been fueled by deep-seated psychological torment. But one chilling fact remained: Jessica had never apologized. Not to Michael. Not to Emily's children. Not to the mother who had lost her firstborn. She had accepted her fate with an eerie calm, as though she had known all along that this moment would come. And that unsettling smile. It haunted those who had seen it. Because behind that expression was a thought that no one wanted to speak aloud. Had she truly lost? Or was this exactly how she wanted to be remembered? Emily's family struggled to rebuild their lives. Michael left their home, unable to walk through the rooms where his wife had once lived, where he had watched her health decline without ever suspecting the truth. And Jessica? She faded into the cold monotony of prison life. But some say that on certain nights, when the lights flickered and the air felt unnaturally still, the guards would catch her staring at the wall with that same small, knowing smile. A chilling reminder that some monsters don't lurk in the shadows. They sit across from us at the dinner table. And they pour the tea. How well do we really know the people closest to us? As the screen fades to black, the final image lingers, a teacup, still full, resting on a kitchen counter. Untouched. Would you drink it? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this story disturbing, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We bring you the most haunting true crime stories, stories that remind us that the greatest dangers aren't always in the unknown. Sometimes, they're right in front of us. Closer than we ever imagined.